Hey everybody, Indy here. Very happy to start recording the beginning of my Introduction to Rolemaster video on skills. Now, just a quick review on a couple little topics from earlier. Skills are really the center of active every session play in Rolemaster. So this is really what drives the game. Their stats, your profession check selection, these are all just things that kind of feed into the skills. Now, and the professions are particularly important because they affect the cost of developing your skills, which we'll get into a little bit more later. And I kind of covered a lot in the profession video, and that there are professional bonuses for certain skills. So, and also again, professions is essentially the word for class, but it doesn't mean the same thing as it does in other systems. Go back to the general expectations video for stuff about that. So, first and foremost, let me just cover some organizational stuff. There are the skills are grouped into categories, and here I have the Rolemaster 2 categories. Now, what's a little confusing in Rolemaster 2 is that this is the skills and the categories: maneuver and armor, weapon skills, general skills, magical skills, special skills. This groups costs, but then there's also the professional bonuses, which are not actually designed the same way. For instance, combat includes the maneuver in armor skills. So you had two different categorization methods in Rolemaster 2, whereas in Rolemaster Unified, what you have here is the categories of skills here on the left, and these are the same categories they use for anything else like professional bonuses. So that's a little different. RMSS and RMFRP, as far as I understand, are structured very similarly to Rolemaster 2, quite possibly minus the two different categorization methods. So they just skills are in categories much like this. Now, how you go forward with the skills, I covered this again in the professions video, but I'll cover it again here. You buy ranks per level using your development points, and each profession has different costs to skills. And in Rolemaster 2, you have things like what they call rapid development, which is basically the ability to get a second rank in a level, more at a higher cost usually. So in here we see the skill costs for the fighter, thief, rogue, and warrior monk in the general skills. So the fighter developing climbing will spend 3 of his development points to get 1 rank and 7 if he wants to get a second rank, so a total of 10. And the different professions, as I said, have different costs. Now, in Rolemaster 2, some skills can be rapid developed. Other skills may only be developed once. Some skills can be developed any number of times for a particular cost. Whereas if you look in Rolemaster Unified, everything has 2 costs. They just may be very high. It's also worth pointing out that in RMSS and RMFRP, one of the major differences here is that they added a skill cost to the category of skills. All the Rolemaster systems have a decreasing benefit to developing skills. There's an actual phrase for that. I forget what it is though. So in general, they all worked much like this, and this is specifically the Rolemaster Unified approach, where if you don't have any ranks in a skill, you have a negative 25 bonus. So it's not neutral. It's worse than neutral. Then for the first 10 ranks of a developed skill, you're going to get +5 to your rolls for each rank. And then the next 10 is +3, then 2, then 1. They all do slightly different numbers and slightly different break-offs for the ranks, but they all essentially start with the first 10 ranks are +5. From there, they vary a little bit. If you want to crunch the numbers, if you're interested in that, you can go back to the professions video, look at the part where I talk about professional bonuses for skills, and figure out what that means, someone who is bonused, what that looks like compared to someone who isn't bonused through the levels, or maybe even compare how someone is bonused, what they look like through the different systems. But you can do that on your own. As I said in the statistics video, the stats are really only there. There are no direct stat roles. The stats feed into the other roles you would make. For instance, with the skills, there will be one or more, depending on the edition, of stats feeding into your skills. So for instance, oh, that's prerequisites. I'm sorry, I marked the wrong one. Just as an example, here we are in Rolemaster 2, and here's the different list of skills here on the left of this table. And what they say here is that here's the first stat that you want to include, the basic stat, if all you want to do is run with one stat. And optionally, if you want to use one of the optional rules, you can evolve multiple stats, and then that would be this list. So some of the skills only listed 2 stats with the expanded list, and some listed 3. Anytime where there was more than one stat, you were supposed to be averaging it. And that is how the stats fed into the skills. And this is how you could have a good enough stat to give you a really awesome skill, even though you've only developed it for 1 rank, or even potentially bringing you into a positive score with no ranks. Hey guys, as I'm putting this video together, I realized I made a mistake here. And I did mention this in the professions or the stat video, that in some editions of Rolemaster, such as Rolemaster 2, you averaged all the included stat bonuses, and the stat bonuses were, varied from, they were more like 5 to 10, plus 5 to 10, maybe 15 or higher. But other Rolemaster systems, such as the RMSS and RMU lines, they gave you smaller individual stat bonuses, like more like 1 to 5, but you were supposed to add all the stats listed together. I must have just only thought about the average idea because I've got almost 20 years experience playing Rolemaster 2 exclusively, and that's the page I was looking at. But small correction there to my own video. Now, in play, how did skills get used, and how did you resolve their effects? I'm just gonna talk about this. I'm not gonna have pictures. So the procedure is pretty much the same for most skills in Rolemaster. Roll your D100, add your skill bonus, add any modifiers for the situation, and then you either passed or you failed. And now there were 2 categories of skills, and if you look back at some previous pages, you can maybe see them noted, especially the stat page. Some of them are considered static skills, and some were called move maneuvers. The static skills tended to be both, not only were physically kind of static and standing in one place, but they were pass-fail. So it was very binary. And then the move maneuvers were more, they did usually incorporate some kind of movement, but it was also the kind of skills where getting 70% of what you wanted still was something. And you could house rule some of the skills. Like I think pick locks was static. I suppose you could house rule it, whereas getting a 70% success really meant that you were 70% of the way towards picking a lock. You could do it that way, or that you gained some understanding of the lock. Now in Rolemaster 2, so the static was a simple raw pass-fail with a 101 or 100 barrier for success. Though starting with the Rolemaster 2 books, or not the Rolemaster 2 books, but the Rolemaster Companion 2, which added over 100 skills to the system, they also included some optional tables for use that had more definitions of partial passes, so partial successes. So you didn't quite break 100, but you got close. Though I think some of them also pushed success then higher than 100. So the partial success might be from 80 to 110 or something like that. Rolemaster Unified, the statics were all fail, partial pass, pass. and they had a little extra stuff in the end as well. But the meat of it was always partial success was included. And Rolemaster 2 and Rolemaster Unified's move maneuvers were all pretty much the same. It has a little chart that says, you know, if they got 120, then they have 100% success. 100 to 119 was 90% success, whatever. And they just built that. And the way I personally use that might be, you know, you need to jump over a chasm. It's 6 feet across, roll, and I'll use move maneuver on it. You know, so you know, maybe 90% is still actually successfully getting across it, just not as comfortably. Like you poop your pants as you think you're about to fall to your death, but you actually make it, that kind of thing. That's how I would use it. And as far as I know, Rolemaster Standard System and Rolemaster Fantasy Role Playing use the same kind of skill resolution. Now, through the editions, there were some of the skills that handled things a bit differently. That was supposedly one of the negatives that some of the other players, like the other fans, had on the original system, was that too many of the skills didn't get resolved the same way. I didn't really see it that way until I really started trying to, like, I would reject their comment, and then they would say, well, there's this skill and this skill and this skill and this skill and this skill, and I'm like, oh, actually there are quite a few that don't resolve the same way. But when you play with Rolemaster Companion 2, and it's skill list, as most people who say they play Rolemaster 2 are actually doing, that's still a lot of skills that resolve the same general way. But nonetheless, there are some special skills. I'm not going to comment on RMSS and RMFRP since I've not really ever played those to a large extent, so I don't know if what their special skills are like. So, but in general, the special skills fall under 3 categories. First, no freebies. In Rolemaster, as I said somewhere else in the general expectations, you don't get hit points per level based on your class or anything. You have to develop the skill called body development. Now, the different systems handled this differently. For instance, Rolemaster 2, each rank awarded you a hit die, and a hit, you know, that was much more closely tied to its Dungeons and Dragons house rules at that point. It granted you a hit die, and the different races had different hit dice. So like the dwarves had a D10, and the halflings had a D6, and I think the humans had like a D8. So that's, and you rolled it per rank. And the Rolemaster Unified, for instance, treats it like every other skill. You know, the first 10 ranks get you +5 each, the second 10 ranks get you +3 each, etc., etc. And they handle the race differently. Like instead of having, since they don't have hit dice, you just have an amount of hit points that you start with because you're X race. So if you don't ever develop body development, you at least still have some hit points. Whereas honestly, back in Rolemaster 2, if you never developed body development, you would have at most 11 hits. That's it, because you got a 1/10 of your Constitution temporary stat. So there's not freebies. Rolemaster 2 gave you your power points, which you use to cast spells, based on your stat and your level. And starting with optional rules that came in the Rolemaster Companions, and then with all the other later systems, it was a skill that you had to develop just like body development. Special category 2 is the weapon choices, and this is really interesting and unique. And let me switch to the window here to show it to you. As you see here, so there are weapon skills. You notice that they don't just list, so they've got the weapon skills category, much like they have a maneuver and armor category. But maneuver and armor says, and these are the skills, and therefore these are the costs for the skills. It doesn't do that in weapon skills. There are 6 categories of weapons: the one-handed edge, the one-handed crush, blah, blah, blah. You can read that. And what they gave you per class was 6 weapon development costs. So for instance, the fighter had a category that he could assign the 1/5 to. and then a category that he could assign the 2/5 to, etc., etc. And some one of the categories is going to get 5. So you got to pick which weapon group was your favorite weapon group and which one was your worst. And you just got to assign it that way. So thieves probably weren't going to develop any more than 2 weapon categories because that's where their cheapest are and their rapids. But then again, it's 2, 3, and then 4. That's really not all that different. And at 7 and 8, you're probably not rapid developing those a whole lot anyways. And the rogue got a little better. And if you look down at the magicians and all the other like pure mages here, or the essence users, I should say, they're probably only ever going to develop 1 weapon category, and even then, it's not going to be developed a lot. And this gets back into where I talked about specialization earlier. This is really where it comes in. You assigned the cost to the category. My fighter wants 1/5 to go to the 2-handed weapons. I still had to decide which weapon I was developing. So it would be the 2-handed category and thus have a 1/5 cost. But what I was actually developing is the great sword. And this is where RMSS and RMFRP their category skill development seems to be a little more immediately evident. It will make more sense as an example because you could put 1 rank into greatsword and 1 rank into 2-handed weapons. And now you've got an increased bonus for your greatsword, for your great maul, for all of those 2-handed non-polearm, non-bow weapons, because you see that those have their own category here. But with your greatsword, you got both of the bonuses. So the weapon assignment, that's a really different and unique part of Rolemaster. Now, the third category of special groups would be the ones that do things by rank and not so much by bonus. In Rolemaster 2, Ambush, what it did was you got to adjust critical rolls by the number of ranks you had in Ambush. As far as I know, there was no purpose to rolling an Ambush skill. You didn't do that. Likewise, the languages. The languages in, again, both RMU and RM2, those are the 2 that I know the best. The number of ranks you had in a skill determined your fluency, which is what you might expect. But I'm just saying you weren't looking at bonuses. So if you had a really high stat bonus that would have bonused the language really well, you weren't looking at that to determine your fluency. You're just looking at your number of ranks. And you developed written languages separate than spoken languages. So in a 4-language world, you would normally have 8 language skills separately. You'd have, language man written, language man spoken, language elven written, language elven spoken. And with the single rank, that just meant you could identify that that's what the language was, but you didn't know anything more than that. And you only required 4 ranks to get to normal, average, everyday communication. Like by the time you got to 10, you were an amazing know-it-all, archaeologist of languages almost, where you knew all the different dialects and all the different words. Though later you could potentially make the language skill a roll to determine, more specific or chancy ideas. Like I used it a little bit to determine like, hey, so how well did you communicate this idea that you're looking for someone who looks like this? How well did you do that? How much did they understand? Like if I was using contract negotiations in my game, that'd be constant language rolls, right? Like just, did you catch this little note here? Did you catch that little backdoor that they put into the contract here? So that is Rolemaster skills. I think Rolemaster spells are next, and then some items, and I can't remember what else is after that, but we're getting, I feel like I know I had a huge list, but at the same time, I feel like I'm getting close. After spells, I think a lot of them are going to be a lot shorter than this one, which is great. And then we're going to get into some character generation. and then some mock skill usage and combats. Look forward to those. I will have a special invite or request for character generation, which I'll talk about later. So stay tuned for that. And I hope you're having a great day. Bye.